Hi, everyone. We're going to let people in for maybe 1 minute or two, and then we're going to start. Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to the Digging Deeper into Effective Climate Governance in the Canadian Mining Sector webinar, organized by the Canada Climate Law Initiative. Today, our distinguished speaker will discuss the risk and opportunities that climate change poses to mining companies, how executive and board members can best manage and oversee the risk, what their legal duties are, and how they can advance climate action. Before I introduce you to the panelists, I want to recognize that I'm calling from Tiohtià:ke, also called Montreal, home to many First Nation, including the Kanakahaga, Huron, Wendat, and Anishinaabe. I invite you to take the time to reflect on the land you are currently situated on and on the Indigenous communities who have been custodians of the lands and waters on which we meet today. Today, the discussion will be moderated by Dr. Sara Ghebremusse, professor at Western Law, Castle Chairs in Mining Law and Finance, and Principal Investigator at CCLI. She will be joined by Helen Tooze, author of the guide, affiliated scholar at CCLI, and PhD candidate at Allard Law. Lana Eagle, director of the Canadian Institute of Mining, Metallurgy, and Petroleum, and chair of the Aboriginal Relations Committee of the Association for Mineral Exploration, BC. And finally, they will be joined by Sheila Colman, VP Legal and Sustainability and Corporate Secretary of Luden Gold and non-ED of Lucara Diamond. I want to remind you that if you want to ask questions to the panelists, please use the Q&A box. And with that in mind, I will pass it on to Sara.
Thank you, Sonia Lee. We're going to start off our discussion today with a presentation from Helen, who will provide us with an overview of the mining guide that she so brilliantly drafted. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Sara. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we convene to delve into the intricate landscape of climate-related risks and opportunities within the Canadian mining sector. As we embark on this journey, it's essential to scrutinize the multifaceted challenges and potential avenues for growth and adaptation that lie ahead. The physical risks posed by climate change are manifold. Acute weather events like hurricanes, floods, and wildfires, as well as chronic changes such as sustained heat waves and sea level rises, can disrupt mining operations in numerous ways. From limiting access to sites to damaging infrastructure and endangering lives, these risks are tangible and demand proactive mitigation strategies. Transition risks, on the other hand, stem from policy shifts, technological advancements, and evolving market dynamics. Regulatory changes, such as that introduced by the EU and the UK, as well as the proposed National Instrument 51107 and the Canadian Sustainability Disclosure Standards, that's a bit of a mouthful, have far-reaching implications for mining companies operating globally. Failure to comply with these regulations can lead to reputational damage and financial penalties. Similarly, market and reputational risks are reshaping investor expectations with a growing emphasis on ESG factors. Investors are increasingly scrutinizing companies' efforts to mitigate climate change and uphold sustainable practices. The mining sector must rise to meet these expectations, not only to secure investment, but also to foster trust and goodwill within the communities they operate. In EY's annual survey on the risks most important to investors in the global mining sector, the top 4 in 2024 were local community impacts, tailing and water management, water stewardship, and attaining net zero emissions. The impact of mining operations on local communities and Indigenous lands is vital. Companies that fail to prioritize environmental stewardship risk irreparable damage to their reputation and viability. Recent incidents, such as the destruction of sacred Indigenous sites by mining activities in Australia, serve a stark reminder of the need for greater accountability and respect for Indigenous rights. Inadequate management of tailings can result in environmental disasters with far-reaching consequences. Mining companies must invest in responsible tailing practices to mitigate these risks and earn the trust of investors and communities alike. Water stewardship is also paramount, especially in light of increasing water scarcity. Mining operations must prioritize efficient water usage and management to minimize their impact on local ecosystems and communities. Mining companies have set their targets for achieving net zero, and failing to achieve these important decarbonization milestones could pose significant reputational and investor risks for the sector. This is exacerbated by difficulties posed by mining companies in demonstrating their progress towards net zero targets and their low carbon initiatives directly translated and how they translate into lower emissions. Technology adaptation is a transition risk as well that will play a crucial role in the transition to net zero. New technologies offers promise, but also pose risks that must be carefully managed. New technologies have unforeseen drawbacks, which negate their benefits to the climate. Despite the formidable challenges posed by climate-related risks, the mining sector is replete with opportunities for innovation and adaptation. Milder winters, for instance, may mitigate the need for extensive heating in underground mines, thereby reducing operational costs and enhancing energy efficiency. Shifts in precipitation patterns and snowmelts in mining regions offer opportunities to augment localized water sources, facilitating sustainable water management practices and mitigating water scarcity risks. Moreover, the melting of sea ice may unlock new mining opportunities in previously inaccessible regions. The energy transition toward net zero presents a paradigm shift for the mining industry, catalyzing investments in clean technologies, renewable energy sources, and carbon neutral processes. By embracing decarbonization initiatives and reducing their carbon footprint, mining companies can position themselves as leaders in sustainable resource extraction. Furthermore, advancements in digitization, automation, and artificial intelligence holds immense promise for enhancing operational efficiency, optimizing resource utilization, and minimizing environmental impacts. By leveraging cutting-edge technologies, mining companies can drive productivity gains, improve safety outcomes, and reduce their ecological footprint. Companies that invest in innovative solutions in climate-related challenges will position themselves as leaders in the industry. In light of these challenges and opportunities, directors and officers of mining companies have a duty to act in the best interest of their company. Fiduciary duties compel them to consider the long-term impacts of climate change in their operations and take proactive measures in mitigating those risks. In discharging their duties, directors must adopt a proactive and forward-looking approach to climate-related risks and opportunities, and this entails conducting comprehensive risk assessments, integrating climate considerations into strategic decision-making processes, and fostering a culture of accountability and transparency within the organization. Moreover, directors are tasked with overseeing and implementing the robust governance frameworks, policies, procedures to address climate-related risks effectively, and this includes establishing clear lines of communication, defining roles and responsibilities, and ensuring that adequate resources are allocated to support climate-resilient initiatives. Directors have a duty to stay abreast of emerging regulatory developments as well, industry best practices, technological innovations relevant to climate governance. These are all important. And by remaining informed and engaged, directors can enhance their capacity to anticipate, mitigate, and adapt to evolving climate-related challenges, thereby safeguarding the long-term viability of the company. Lastly, under Canadian securities law and accounting standards, companies are increasingly required to disclose climate-related risks and opportunities. In the realm of securities law and accounting standards, compliance is paramount to ensure transparency, accountability, and investor confidence. Canadian security law mandates the disclosure of material climate-related risks and their management strategies in annual reports, prospectuses, and other regulatory filings. Proposed regulations, such as the National Instrument 51-107, seek to standardize climate-related reporting practices, aligning them with internationally recognized frameworks. By adhering to these regulatory requirements, mining companies can enhance the quality and the consistency of their climate-related disclosures, enabling investors to make informed decisions about the company's risk profile and long-term prospects. The International Financial reporting standards and Canadian Accounting Standards Board also require publicly accountable enterprises to consider climate-related matters when preparing their financial statements, ensuring that material climate-related risks and opportunities are adequately reflected in financial reporting. The adoption of sustainability-related disclosure standards, such as IFRS S1 and S2, and the proposed Canadian Sustainability Disclosure Standards underscore the growing importance of integrating climate considerations into the corporate reporting frameworks. Navigating the complex terrain of climate-related risks and opportunities within Canadian mining sector requires concerted effort to integrate climate-related governance considerations into strategic decision-making processes. By embracing innovation, upholding fiduciary duties, and complying with securities law and accounting standards, mining companies can chart a course towards a sustainable growth, resilience, and long-term value creation. The Canadian mining sector stands at a crossroads. Climate change presents unprecedented challenges, but also opportunities for innovation and adaptation. It's incumbent upon all stakeholders to work together to navigate these challenges responsibly and unearth a greener future for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, for that overview of the guide. We're joined by an incredible panel to comment both on the guide that Helen has prepared and also just generally on the topic of climate governance as it relates to large-scale mining. And so just a reminder of the format for the moderated discussion. I will lead the discussion for about 20-25 minutes. Just pose some questions that have been developed for the panel, and then we'll open it up to the floor, and at that point take questions from the audience. I will be keeping an eye out though on the Q&A in case the Q&A chat box, in case there are any questions that pop up that are similar to the ones that I'm going to ask our esteemed panel, and I will address them then. And if not, we'll get to those questions, as many as we can, during the Q&A. So I wanted to start off our discussion with a very basic and straightforward question. I think Helen's presentation and the guide as well did a very good job of explaining why climate governance is important. But I also wanted to get sort of your perspectives, Sheila and Lana, and especially why you think climate governance is important now for large-scale mining companies. So,
yeah.
Sure.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks. I can dive in first. Lana, I'm sure you'll have more to say than me. I actually thought that was a really big question when I saw it. I mean, I think climate risks and opportunities are, in my view, they're quite complex, and in one way or another, all of our companies and all of our stakeholders are either being or will be impacted by climate change in the future. Having robust climate governance provides a framework for boards and management teams to oversee the various aspects of the climate action that needs to be taken around mitigation, adaptation, and providing resilience for the company, and also for all of our stakeholders. So, over to you, Lana.
Yeah, I got to make sure. Is my microphone on?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be on this panel today. And thank you for the good read, Helen. I enjoyed reading it, and I learned a lot from it. I think as a Canadian, these questions are percolating in our minds, especially after we've been part of some major weather events out here in British Columbia, and I'm sure, happening across other parts of Canada as well. And now we're heading into fire season. So it will be interesting to see how that all works out in the end. But, I think Canadians and Indigenous people are becoming more concerned about climate change. And certainly, what can mining do to help minimize those risks, when it comes to the environment? And I'll give you an example. I was on a project a couple of years ago where we were doing some very early engagement with an Indigenous community around exploration. And one of the people that we first met with was an elder from the community. And her two concerns were water and climate change. And there were no simpler kind of words to explain what she was interested in as an elder, and how we would work together with them to help mitigate some of those potential endangerments to the community. So I think what is happening across Canada is we as civil society, or as members of a community or an Indigenous community, are becoming more knowledgeable about these concerns and these risks. And because mining companies have their operations on Indigenous land here in Canada, I think those individuals and communities that are located near a mining operation have every right to be more concerned. And if you're not having those topical discussions with leaders of the community, with the community, on the what could possibly happen if there was a flood or if there was a forest fire that put their community in danger, how is a mining company going to help alleviate some of those drastic outcomes? So I think we are in a place now, whether we believe in climate change or not, we can all agree that there are some major weather events happening across this country. So we have to be in a place to discuss this and to work together to find solutions to help mitigate some of the problems. So I'll just leave it at that. But I do thank you, Helen, for this amazing report. And for those of you that haven't had a chance to read it yet, you should read it. It'll help percolate some thoughts in terms of how your company might approach climate change.
Helen, is there anything you want to add?
No, I do believe Lana and Sheila covered the main ideas behind. It's important now because you can see it changing. The world around us is changing. You can't deny it. And taking those steps to adapt and mitigate these risks is essential if a company is going to survive going forward.
Yeah. A lot of the sort of emphasis when it comes to climate action by large corporations is those who are sort of the repeat offenders. And I think a lot of mining companies and the industry as a whole, I think is fair to say, are under the impression that mining is here to do more to help us fight climate change, because our transition to a greener economy requires a lot of the metals that mining is unable to unearth. But that doesn't neglect the fact or negate the fact that mining companies should be doing a lot to actually respond to climate change. So in your view, and maybe we can go in reverse order here, what should Canadian mining companies already be doing in terms of their climate governance or just general response and action to climate mitigation? So Helen, why don't we start with you?
Well, going from, I guess, the scholarly perspective, there's your four main pillars of climate governance, which you see they're based on the TCFD guidelines, which really is effective climate governance, which is governance that's coming from your director's perspective, from the top down, managing these risks, mitigating them, identifying them. So you've got your governance pillar. You have your disclosure pillar, which would incorporate everything. You need to incorporate on all of the other three pillars, and disclose effectively in all your financial statements. And in other ways as well, I find you mentioned companies that are repeat offenders, but are also, there's some that are excellent, and they create their own climate governance disclosure guides, and every year, and they're comparable from year to year, which is really helpful. It's clear and concise, and they've kept it as something that's quite special. I think that has a lot to do with it. You have risk management, so identifying your risk management, incorporating that risk management into your strategies, into your normal risk management practices. Your climate related risks need to be incorporated into just your usual risk management practices, and setting targets and metrics. that comes as a large and very difficult thing right now, especially for mining companies, is being able to set those decarbonization targets, have the right data to be able to show that you're making progress. I think everybody recognizes the difficulties that is faced, but being able to overcome those difficulties, work together, find ways to overcome these challenges is really important. So you've got your main ones, you've got your governance, your risk management, your targets and metrics, and your disclosure.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, Lana, what in your view should mining companies already be doing?
Well, I think companies are already doing this, but I think they can even be better, and that's education. And it's probably hidden in there in what Helen just explained, but I think there has to be a better outward-looking kind of website page that talks about risks and how they're mitigating those risks and how they're getting better at what they do and the measurements they have in place, so that if I, as an investor, decide that I want to, take a look to see what this company is doing in particular about climate change, I can go to a page and find all that information out. If I live in a community and I'm concerned because now all of a sudden people are talking about climate change, and it's something that I know and understand, because of my community and where it's located, but I've never heard the company talk about it. No one's come here to this village to talk about climate change and what the company is doing. And so, here's an opportunity for me to go to their website and find out more about what the company is doing about climate change. But I think even a step before that is beginning to have those conversations with people in the community and to talk about those things that are concerning, because those are the issues that a community may have about a project. And if you're looking for that license to operate, I think those open lines of communication are important. And maybe, the community has never come out to say, water is really important to us, because maybe they've never had that opportunity to discuss what are the issues. But I think to begin those conversations, and that might change, your approach to how things are dealt with, but it certainly opens up the line of communication. So education and communication, I think, are really key.
Thanks for that answer, Lana. What about you, Sheila?
Yeah, I guess when I saw this question, I sort of looked at it sort of internally on what a company should be doing. And I guess I have sort of 4 steps that I saw in terms of starting your climate action or advancing it. The first thing that I think for me would be the starting place would be to make sure that you've got an executive on your team that is responsible for climate. There needs to be accountability at the executive level with a specific person. And then I know we'll get into this later. There needs to be somebody on the board, a committee of the board that is specifically charged with oversight of climate. The next step for us certainly was budget. Like you need, climate work is expensive. It's a new science. You need to make sure that you've got enough budget allocated on an annual basis towards the things that have been talked about, like the climate education, the climate communication. And so once you've got that sort of executive level ownership, you can start to have a budget that's responsible for the company's climate action. And then the competency building piece, this is where the budget comes in handy. It's educating both management and board, making sure that you have climate expertise on the board, which might mean changing your board composition. And then I think once you've got those foundations in place, you can start the exercise of rolling up your sleeves, right? Like you're educated now, and you can, as a company, understand your risks, your opportunities, like figure out how to identify them, what your action should be. So that to me is sort of the triage of how do you get your climate action started.
And if I could ask a follow-up, both to you, Sheila, and Lana, since you have such extensive experience working with mining companies already, what are some of the key lessons that you've learned from this experience as it relates to climate governance?
Who do you want to go first?
I'll go first, and you'll probably
Okay.
have more to add to it. I think that to be effective with climate change is to actually work collaboratively with communities and with partners, whether it's in the value chain or whether it's in communities where your operation is located. But I think people from those different groups have something to add to make your action plan more successful. And I think that, climate change in the way we approach it is not entirely new. I mean, we've spent time and energy, trying to be better equipped to work with Indigenous communities. A lot of, I think, time and effort has been put towards inclusion. So these are sort of like, I'm sure some of the feedback might be, oh God, not something else again. But I think that if we can find a way to make all of these programs successful, and I think at the heart of it is really communication and education. And I know Sheila brought up some really good ideas too about, getting the executive involved and, getting people more knowledgeable about what is climate change exactly and how does it affect us, or how can we affect climate change. So I think it's an approach that's not just singularly looking at one dynamic. It's taking into account everything, but using things like clear communication and meaningful collaboration as part of the route to get there.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, what has been, I think, a difference maker for us in the past couple of years in our climate journey was operationalizing our climate strategy. And it's one thing to sit here in Vancouver and talk about climate and our climate risks and come up with a climate strategy. The challenge is really taking that climate strategy and putting it into operations in a way that the operations team can contribute to it and can execute against it. And again, like the ingredient that made a difference for us was ownership at the operations level. And there's a lot of commonality between reduction measures and operational efficiency. And when, we were able to sort of, I guess I'm going to keep using that word operationalize, but when we're able to take the climate strategy and the decarbonization initiatives and turn them into operational objectives, that's when we started to get some traction.
Okay. Now, given your experiences and you, Helen, after having done this research and drafted this guide, what do you think Canadian mining companies, what else should they be doing? What more should they be doing at this point to help mitigate climate change and to reinforce their climate governance? So, Helen, why don't we just start with you?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I can cover off little bits that I covered in the guide, which were really fed to me by Sheila in a very long discussion we had. So I know that Sheila would be able to build on that, and so would Lana. I recognize 5 potential areas that mining companies could grow on. They could develop more and take those next steps rather than stagnating in their climate governance journey. First was the more detailed target setting. I did mention it before, and a clear plan to achieve them. Again, it comes back to being able to, I think, like Sheila says, operationalize, actually see how climate's going to affect you, seeing how you're going to set those targets and in practice what they'll look like within your operation. I think companies are struggling with that, all companies, not just mining companies. The next would be data collection and measurement. Again, something that we have covered. It's a new science. It's early days. being able to especially measure your net zero, your decarbonization targets, those kind of things, getting that data down the value chain, especially scope 3, which is to do with external operations and how but how that affects you, is very, very difficult, because smaller companies might not have the infrastructure yet to be able to measure and know what their decarbonization levels are, what they're currently putting out in carbon. It's difficult. Then we have adaptation initiatives. I think this again applies to most companies, not just mining companies, but when it came specifically to mining companies, being able to put into place new technologies, new ideas on how you were going to transport, how you're going to manufacture, how you're going to extract, and what kind of new technologies we could introduce to make that better, but also to protect the environment, the operation itself, and the local communities. That leads nicely on, segues nicely on to the next one, which is greater consideration for your local communities and the impacts that your mining operation has on that. And that was a lot to do with collaborating with local communities, Indigenous communities especially, talking about the issues that the communities are worried about, but also interestingly, the idea of sharing weather-related events and what the mining company knows is coming with those local communities and helping them adapt, which was a really nice idea. And then the idea of a circular economy, so recycling, reusing. You've got waste piles where there's extra that can be extracted, but then those waste piles can be used by other companies to make roads and all these kind of wonderful things. And then extracting also end-of-life use from products. So laptops and phones, there's wonderful elements, rare earth elements in there, and batteries now with electric vehicles, that we need to be able to extract and reuse as much as possible, because there's a limited supply.
Right. That is a long list of things that mining companies could be doing. Yeah, or should be doing going forward. Lana, Sheila, is there anything that you want to add or elaborate on?
I'm just going to say one thing that kind of departs, but I think is related. You know, I understand the report was written for major mining companies, but, you know, there are a lot of junior mining companies in Canada that are trying to, you know, have the next big find, you know, so that they can be acquired by a larger company. But I think what's really important in those early days is that trusted relationships are built with Indigenous communities. And I think, you know, once that trust has been built, you know, if a major company comes along to acquire that company, I think it is important to Indigenous communities that there's an alignment of values. So I think some of these things that we talk about regarding climate change can start to take place in the early days when juniors are out there. And it comes from understanding, you know, what the issues are of the local community and how they can help alleviate some of those issues, if not mitigate. And I think that will become more important in the future. It's not that, you know, bang, we wake up and next thing you know, there's a major mining company that's acquired the property and now we have to deal with climate change. I think climate change can be dealt with even earlier than what this report suggests. But, you know, and as majors look to acquire juniors, you know, they'll be looking for some of those alignment of values, I'm sure. And as communities begin to understand, you know, that one day a junior might be acquired by a major, they'll probably look for an alignment of values as well. So these can become part of the early discussions, the early engagement piece that is meaningful to communities. So I think it's never too early to start the discussion around climate change, but it probably, you know, as time moves on, can be late if we're not having those discussions already.
You're right. Definitely. Sheila, is there something that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I guess on the topic of target setting, because that's such an area of focus, and there's an expectation around setting of targets. I guess just to reiterate what was already expressed on this call is target setting is really challenging, and I think it's even more challenging if you do it, and what I'd say would be the right way to do it. Like for us, when we set out to set a target, as we set on the task, we realized that it was actually like peeling layers of an onion. Just as we peel back one layer to try and figure out, okay, how do we set this target? There was a whole new set of questions that came up. And we didn't set the target as early as we wanted. But it was because we had important work to do. And it was really in understanding through an emissions lens, understanding our mine life better, our mine plan better, really digging down and understanding where are your emissions coming from, like really dissecting your emissions profile, because it's really hard to set a target if you don't understand how you're contributing to the problem very, very specifically. And then we also had to understand what was going on in country. We operate in a country that, we're lucky that we have so much of our power from a green grid. But we had to understand with climate modeling that drought conditions are expected to occur more frequently and impact our source of power. And so that had to be layered into our target. We needed to make sure we understood that the emissions profile of our power source is actually going to be changing over our life of mine. To Lana's point about junior companies thinking about climate, I think this target setting exercise is even harder to do the earlier you are in your life of mine. We all hope to have exploration success and expand our life of mines, which actually makes target setting really hard. Like the very success that you're hoping for is actually going to undermine the target that you've set. So it is a really, really challenging exercise, and it's certainly one that we needed the support of external experts to undertake.
Well, thank you for that insight. I think it lends itself well to one of the questions that was posed by the audience. And this is just a reminder for those of you who have your questions, any questions that you would like to ask, please write them in the Q&A chat box. So a member of the audience asks, how do you approach, quote, climate-related risks and opportunities versus those that are specific to climate change only? Is the first one more broad, or is it driven by the latter? And they added, putting in processes as related to climate change may be more constrained versus consideration of climate in general risk management, which is more challenging. Any insights on this would be appreciated. And I kind of think that speaks to what you were just talking about, Sheila, and thinking about the different impacts that a company has, and whether you're thinking about climate related versus, those impacts directly on climate change. I don't want to, put you on the spot, Sheila, but do you want to take a first attempt at this question, and then we'll see if Helen and Lana have anything they want to add?
It's a really excellent question. I think the way that we've approached the issue is through our risk identification process. We in our risk matrix, we do have climate risks in our enterprise risk management framework. And those climate risks are assessed both over short, medium, and long term. The climate related risks, I'm thinking through the type of risks that we've identified. Some of those are indeed climate related. And, I know there's a lot of debate around what happens to commodities, and gold to me is $1 million question. Like, what happens to gold's relevance as climate change becomes a more and more pressing problem? And to me, that's a climate related matter, right? So it's something that is on the risk register, but it's not specific to climate change. So I think it's, I guess a long way of answering the question. I think that as companies and people in position of oversight of these issues, we do need to think about both the direct impact of climate change on our operations and on our areas where we operate and our stakeholders. But we also do need to think about those climate-related risks. And I think that enterprise risk management framework is the right place to capture both types of both the direct and the indirect. I hope that answers the question. It's a good question.
Well, I hope so too. If the anonymous attendee wants to ask any follow-up or anything, please go ahead and do so. But Helen, Lana, is there anything that you want to add to that?
I'm good. I think Sheila said it quite well.
Yeah.
And it's above my pay grade.
Yeah, I think it's an important question to ask. I'll be honest, I don't know how to answer that question. I think Sheila did it really, really well. I don't know how to perfectly answer it in terms of climate risks versus climate-related risks. I honestly haven't seen or paid attention to the distinction, which is obviously a massive faux pas on my part. And it's something I will look to going forward.
Yeah, I'm wondering, it's also very a finite distinction too, Helen, that I think a lot of us are guilty of overlooking.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate Sheila's insights on that and recognizing the distinction between the two and the impact that, of course, that a mining company has to have and the awareness that it has to have around those different risks and management that comes along with that. The other question that was posed, and this I'll direct to you, Helen, is because I believe it was a comment stemming from your presentation. The question is, you really mentioned that under securities law, disclosure of climate-related risks and opportunities is required. And the questioner says they were under the impression this was just from the SEC, so the American requirement, and not Canadian requirement within Canadian securities law. Can you elaborate on the legal requirements around securities disclosure?
It's not, it's been voluntary for quite some time. And I think that's where the confusion is coming in. I mean, the CSA, there's the Canadian Securities Associations, they have stated categorically that climate change, is a material problem going forward, and that disclosure really is required. It is necessary to disclose on material factors within the annual information form, I believe it's called, and the MD&A forms. So it is a requirement. Whether it's publicly listed companies of certain sizes, it's mandated, whereas it's voluntary for smaller companies at the present stage. But this is where National Instrument 51-107 is coming in. It will mandated on a much stronger level. It brings in a lot more disclosure requirements, whereas in the AIF form and the MD&A forms, it's not so much specifically required in there, except as that it falls part of your risks that you have to disclose now. So it's not mandated. It's a bit complicated. Specifically, it's not saying what are your climate-related disclosures, but it is saying what is your risks. And the Canadian security exchanges they expect climate to be included within those risks.
Certainly moving in that direction for sure. Yeah. Lana or Sheila, do you also want to respond to that question and sort of just generally thinking about considerations, securities requirements around climate-related disclosure?
Yeah, I can weigh in on that one. And I think it'll just be to echo what Helen has expressed, and that is that, public companies are under an obligation to disclose all of their material risks to their shareholders. And the CSA has come out only through bulletins, encouraging issuers to recognize that climate change may be a material risk for them. I think that's where TCFD comes in as a tool for companies. If you go through that TCFD exercise, walk through the framework, you'll be in a better position to assess whether or not climate change does present a material risk. If it does, you are under a legal obligation to disclose it. The Canadian securities administrators, I think, are very much in a wait and see on this. The Europeans and even the SEC to some extent have been more proactive. So I think we have a sense of what mandatory disclosure is going to look like in Canada one day. But I don't think Canada is, well, they're already not a leader, but I think that, you know, they're going to wait until the dust settles on like the integration of ISSB into Canada, how CSRD rolls out in the EU, and what do our neighbors to the south do. And then I think we'll finally see Canada take a position. So I think mandatory climate disclosure is still a few years off in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And the only comment I'll make is I sit on the board of a publicly traded company, and it's a junior mining company. So this past year, we started disclosing our ESG and reporting on that. And I know that it's very early stages in terms of, you know, what we reported, what we could report on. And it's not mandatory for us to report, but we felt that it was important. And at our next board meeting, I'll be bringing up this whole climate change discussion as well. And it'll probably be early for us, but, you know, it won't be a bad thing for us to start reporting as preliminarily as we can going forward.
Yeah, no, thanks for that insight too, Lana. Seeing as there are no additional questions from the audience, I'll just take the opportunity that we have with our remaining time to go through some of the prepared questions. And if anyone, again, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A chat box. And thinking about some of the sort of themes that have come out in the discussion, I think it would be very interesting because I think all of the three of you would have very different and sort of intersecting insights to offer on this. But if we think about, let's say, like the ideal mining company, and especially a mining company right now that is a leader in climate governance, what is it that they should be doing right now? And if there's a model out there that you want to name, like a company that you think is doing a great job, I mean, feel free to share. But other than that, and also think about the ways in which they are doing things right. Is it about you know, the board structure that they've introduced, the committee around sustainability committee that they've introduced? Is it the structure of this ideal mining company that is, you know, makes it responsive right now to climate change risks or climate related risks, or do you think it's, you know, other factors that, you know, have made this company or this ideal company of yours the model which others should be following? Who wants to start us off? Because that's kind of a tough question. So should we start with the author of the guide?
Sure.
That's probably a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So like my ideal rhetorical company on climate change, on climate governance. That's a tough one. I think that most mining companies are doing the basics when it comes to climate governance, though they're trying to as best as they're well. So my ideal company would obviously have all of those fiduciary duties and reporting requirements checked. But I think for me, it's adaptation and I'm going to steal Lana's there and communication. So my ideal company that would be doing the right thing is speaking to local communities, but also with their stakeholders, their value chain, but also with other companies. You know, there's this competitive edge for every company, and I understand that. But the best way, I think, for companies to overcome this at minimal costs, you know, to reduce costs, to find the best ways, is to work together to find solutions going forward in the future, and to help each other. I know it's not, you're going to lose that competitive edge. I know that'll probably never happen. So I'm living in a dream world, but it's my dream world. But companies that collaborate with each other, that talk with the local communities and find out what is necessary, what's worrying them, and speaking to other companies and finding adaptation initiatives that can work for everybody. If you've got issues, then there's somebody on some other mining board that might have an answer to the questions or the issues that you've got. It's that collaborative approach, I think, would be my ideal, which is, I think, very far off and never going to happen. But that's me.
Yeah. How about you, Lana? What do you think is your ideal mining company?
Well, at the risk of naming one company and not naming another, I'm going to put Tech's name forward. I noticed a lot of people from Tech registered for this call today, and I noticed one of them had a title Director of Climate Change. So I think that speaks very positively about a company if they've allocated a position, you know, to deal with climate change. But also, I look at the other areas that Tech is working in, you know, that their diversity and inclusion, as well as, you know, working with Indigenous peoples, you know, how can they do that better? And that speaks to me about a company that is, you know, willing to say that they need to make some change, but also to find a way to make the change to be a better actor, if you will. And I think, as I said earlier, like, this isn't just something that happens in isolation. It sort of is across everything that you do in the company. And I think so. It may be that climate change is rising to the surface right now, but there are other things on the social side of mining that become increasingly important, whether it's in the C-suite or in operations, or, you know, when new people are brought into the company, how and what does that look like? And I think if a company is willing to explore that further and to implement some of those ideas and changes. And I like that idea too that Helen brought forward about, you know, collaborating with other companies and talking to other companies. And I don't know how much of that is actually happening, but I think more of that needs to happen. Just because we are human beings and we seem to generate, you know, good ideas from different people, you know, in different parts of the industry, whether we're on the exploration side or the operational side, or government side, or Indigenous community side. You know, we have to find a way to all work together to change this world into a better place.
Yeah. And Sheila, from your experience, I mean, you can certainly be biased and name your own company if you want.
Well, I agree with everything that Helen and Lana have said. I won't name names, but I certainly, I think there's a lot of really excellent leaders in the climate space that come from the mining sector. I think mining companies don't often get enough recognition for the efforts that are being made in this area. When I, you know, just to think of a couple of things that I look for when I'm looking at the leaders, as I think of our climate work and where do I need to push us, you know, you see a lot of companies that will sort of go through sort of the 4 pillars of TCFD and touch on them. But I really look to those leaders that have done scenario analysis. Scenario analysis is such an important tool in climate readiness. Doing good climate scenario work, and then also taking the scenario analysis and making it make sense in your strategy, to me is something where, you know, if I think of the leaders, that's one of the things the leaders are doing really well. The other thing that I think the leaders are doing really well, and they're few and far between, in that is actually going the step of figuring out what the financial impact is going to be of climate change. Like, there aren't a lot of companies that have wrestled with that. And And that's where we need to take this, right? As we head to integrated reporting on climate change, we need to, when we talk about material from the company's perspective, we need to be able to talk about it in terms of dollar terms. This is what climate change is going to cost us in the future. Either it's for adaptation or it's just impact. And this is why it's material to us, and this is why we're taking action. So it's, there aren't as many companies that are doing that. And for the ones that are, like, I really look to how they're doing it to try to understand it, because it's really hard work. So those are the ones I hold up as leaders in this space.
So while in the lead up to that last question that I asked, there were a flurry of questions that came in. So I think in our remaining time, I'll try to maybe pose a couple of them at the same time so we can get your responses. The first one I think is just more of a comment. The attendee wrote, "We have been identifying requirements for climate adaptation into certificates as well. The issue is that we have to comply with reporting requirements at international, ISSB, CSRD, and for certificates, IRMA and Copper Mark, and later national. It would be important to try to have synergy between all these to make it clear to our communities and stakeholders the risks we face and our actions to mitigate them." So I think that is sort of building upon the comments around synergy and sort of trying to, I think, make this process a little more streamlined than it may currently be. This is a very interesting question, I think, that ties to questions around climate governance and the corporate structure. The question is, can you comment on the roles of the committees for climate disclosures? They said the Safety and Sustainability Committee versus Audit Committee and their roles specific to disclosure requirements. Now, I think given your experience, Sheila, and you as well, Lana, maybe you have some insights on whether this is, in practice, poses a challenge, and whether there are different committees that could be playing this role, or whether it's just a matter of everyone doing their part, really. So Sheila, do you want to start us off on that question?
Sure. Yeah, I'm chuckling at the question because it's exactly what is on my mind these days. In our case, climate has always been overseen by our committee that's responsible for sustainability. It's a Health, Safety, Environment, and Sustainability Committee. And the reason it's not really chuckling, actually, it's more of like a worry line, is because, we are headed towards integrated reporting. We are caught by the European CSRD, by the European reporting requirements. So our sustainability reporting is going to have to be integrated into our annual report in the future. And it's going to be subject to some limited assurance, probably by our auditor. So this is the very question I'm wrestling with. Like, at what point does sustainability get pulled from our sustainability committee, and does it actually need to go to the audit committee, because this information, including our climate data, is now going to live in our annual report? I don't have the answer to that yet. Audit committee is definitely going to have to come to the table on our climate and our other sustainability reporting, now that our auditor is going to have to be at the table. So I think it's a really, really topical question. And I would say in the next sort of 12 to 18 months, we're going to see a real shift in which committee of the board is responsible for what reporting.
Yeah, Lana, has this come up in your board experience as well? No, not yet, but I guess the question I have, further to that question is, if it does fall to the auditor's responsibility, are they in fact, what's the word I'm looking for? Do they have the qualifications to comment on climate change? That would be my question.
I think that lends well to another question that was posed, but before we get there, I know there's a hand up in the audience. So I just want to see, Richard, if you still want to pose your question aloud to the panel, then by all means, go ahead and do so. I feel like it might be related to this question around committees and which ones might be more suitable. So, Richard, if you want to unmute yourself to pose the question, or I'm not hearing Richard at all, and I don't know if he's unable to mute himself, but maybe while we're sorting that technical issue out, I know we're at time, but I really think Lana's last question, as I said, really lends itself to another question that was posed, or her last answer lends itself to this question that was posed around sort of the expertise that mining companies should be looked for in the selection of climate experts or climate data to meet the need of current and pending regulations or shareholder demands. Does anyone want to, based on their experience, want to comment on this? And I'm sure this is something even for you, Helen, that came up as you were working on the report.
I can pick at the climate data piece. One of the things, and this is getting ready for sort of audit of emissions data, one of the things that we have implemented is emissions inventory software. You know, taking it from the Excel sheet that everybody inputs on and shares by email to a standalone portal that manages our emissions data. So, you know, both numbers and support for numbers are inputted into the portal. There's specific users, so we've got controls now. It's like it's around looking for controls on our reporting processes that we've tried to deal with. Eventually, you know, we'll have third parties inputting their emissions data into our portal to allow for you know, actual scope 3 reporting instead of scope 3 reporting just done. GHG protocol lets you do it based on a spend method, but it's actually getting down to raw data on your scope 3 reporting. And it's auditable, which was important to us. So we thought about it long and hard, and it is a step we took was to do data management through software on our emissions, and it has made reporting easier.
Okay. This feels like one of those times where, as an academic, I have no idea what's actually going on the ground, and to hear that there is software.
There's actually a lot of software. It was we were overwhelmed by choice, so there's a lot of choice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Helen or Lana, is there something that you want to add to that? No,
I'm happy with that answer.
And I feel like the last question that we have, and I think it's probably one that could allow us to end on a more helpful note, or the answer just might be software. But the question was, what are the easiest ways that mining companies can achieve emissions reductions? And yeah, I feel like it's a simple question, but one that would have a very complicated answer, I'm sure. But are there any volunteers to kick us off in terms of answering this? Because I'm also content to just say, well, the software that we use can
I think it's a really hard question, and it's very mind specific. I guess maybe I took the question very literally, and to me, it depends on where your emissions are coming from. Mm-hmm. So depending on where your emissions are coming from, that's where your opportunities are. So which consumable is driving your emissions? Is it your scope 1s or your scope 2s? Nobody's even really talking about scope 3s yet from a reduction perspective, but for all of us, it's going to be our scope 3s when we do start to talk about reduction of scope 3s. So yeah, I think the easiest way to do it would be understand your emissions so that you can go for the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Helen or Lana, anything you want to add to that?
Nothing to add on my part.
Well, I was going to say that it's never easy to reduce your emissions, but I think it's not something that there's going to be a quick fix for. It's going to take it's dedication, and like Sheila says, you need to be engaged, you need to be informed. I don't think there's a quick way to reduce your emissions. I do think you need, it's a long slog, learning first your emissions, and then the processes that you can put in place to help with that. But I think it's not going to happen overnight.
No, I mean, you probably could have an entire, spend an entire like week-long conference trying to think about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's definitely important questions and things that companies, and I hope members of the audience will think about. And so since we are over time, I just want to say thank you to our panelists, Helen, Lana, and Sheila for joining us and for sharing your insights and contributing to a really thoughtful and engaging discussion. Thank you, of course, Helen, for writing the guide, and to CCLI's extraordinary team of Melissa and Sonia Lee for organizing today's launch and making sure that all the tech was working smoothly, for posting links to the guide in the chat. So just a reminder to everyone to go and read it. As Lana said earlier, it's a really good read. We really appreciate Helen for writing it, and for Sheila for her contributions to the guide. And thank you all for taking the time out of your Monday afternoons or mornings or wherever you happen to be to join us this afternoon. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day, and a wonderful summer ahead of you as well. Thank you all for coming. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.